braze somebody, then there's a pretty good case for me saying I'm up in court and I'm going to get found guilty of brain somebody. That's how we get evidences. But when we see something and we give a statement, do you write your statement to the police? No, you don't. Why? Not because you're not trusted, but because you don't know how to word it in the right way for the judge or the magistrate. So there are rules and protocols. So a police officer takes your statement, gets your details, story in rough, and then he writes it up, reads it back to you. Are you happy with that? If you are, sign that declaration. So your initial witness testimony then becomes documentary evidence because it's text transcribed into written form. And sometimes it's on audio, sometimes it's on video in certain circumstances. So can you see what I mean? Before I start talking to you about evidence, or what I think is evidence that would stand up in a court of law, I've got to tell you a little about what evidence is, because you're probably not aware of this. It's things that you don't even think about. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Right, okay. I was in Crown Court, this was about 15 years ago, and it was one of the first cases of voyeurism, not easy to say, voyeurism, where a bloke had basically been getting a girl drunk, who just happened to be sitting on a train, got her drunk, plied her with a drink, young girl, he was not twice her age, she got that drunk that she went off to the toilet. He then followed her into the toilet and started taking photographs of her in an undressed state. It was one of the first voyeurism cases. And basically he got arrested and it was all proven. But at Crown Court, we got to talk about what was called the circumstantial evidence case. Rarely do police officers have all the evidence to go to court. We have pieces of a jigsaw. Certain cases may be simpler, but in terms of criminal law, murder, manslaughter, rape, that kind of thing, we rarely go to court knowing all the facts. We go to the case with what's called a circumstantial evidence case. And what I always made a note of it is what the judge said. He said, people get it wrong about a circumstantial evidence case. They think it's not very good evidence. He says that's wrong. And he gave a definition of what he thought circumstantial evidence was. And he said, if you have enough pieces of the jigsaw that you can put them together to create an overwhelming and compelling account of what's occurred, in which a judge or jury can make a determination. So does that make sense? So now let's kind of like go over to the sphere of UFOs. They've probably been around here for thousands of years. But that's too long ago. We can never prove that. So in the modern era, where I focus on, we're talking really from the Second World War onwards. Because we've got still people who are around who give actual genuine accounts from that time, military records, things like that. So these are verifiable cases. It's not just some distant story. We can check. So when we come to the modern era, it's really from about the Second World War onwards. And this is what my evidence will be based on since that point. So what I would say is, and we'll come to the conclusion, but bear that in mind. After 70 odd years, from probably 1940 onwards, is basically where we're going from. So we've now got 76 years from 1940 of some study being done by various people around the world, of which to draw certain conclusions, building up this circumstantial picture of what's going on. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm going to talk about just 5 cases that I think demonstrate what evidence is and what would stand up in a court of law. These are 5 UFO cases. There's no real great graphics with this, so I'll talk about them, so you don't really need to see the screen as such. I want to try to make it as simple as possible. Okay, the first case is a World War II sighting over France. Just a quick side, how many people realise that UFOs were seen regularly during the Second World War? Put your hand up in the air. Put your hand down. How many people didn't realise that UFOs were seen during the Second World War? Put your hand up. Maybe a few, maybe half a dozen. Alright. Now, the popular term for a UFO sighting during the Second World War was Foo Fighters. However, that's a bit of a misnomer, because people talk about balls of light, anywhere from the size of a 10-pence piece, basketball size, up to ginormous 5 times the size of a car, balls of light, following military aircraft in all theatres of war. And when planes tried to evade them, these objects could just manoeuvre right around them. Just plane could never catch them, could never get close, could never shoot them down, and yet none of these objects ever attacked. And genuinely, when the British first saw them, they thought it was a new German weapon. When the Germans saw them, they thought it was a British weapon. When the Americans saw them over Japan and things like that, in the Pacific, they thought it was Japanese. And similarly, the Japanese thought it was American secret weapon. But it wasn't. But not all of the sightings were just little balls of light that danced around planes. And this first case highlights what most people don't realise. On the 11th of August 1944, can you hear me at the back alright? Do I need to go like that, or can you hear me alright? Right, okay, I've got quite a loud voice. Right. The 11th of August 1944, return raid from France. Crew of a Lancaster bomber, crew of 8, tail gunner, top gunner, bottom gunner, front gunner, etc, etc, radio man, pilot, co-pilot, that kind of thing. On the way back, when they suddenly see this. Now for those of you who can't see it, that's a drawing made by one of the witnesses who reported this case. The little black thing at the bottom, you stand up if you want at the back, the little black thing at the bottom, I had no idea that this screen was going to be not so big, right, is a Lancaster bomber. The big thing above it is a huge circular metallic looking disc. And it's a lot bigger than the little plane, isn't it? The Lancaster bomber was one of the largest 4-engine bombers of the Second World War. So generally a large aircraft of the time. Crew of 8. And they said that this object pulled alongside of them as they're on the way back from a raid over France for 5 minutes. It's got a row of windows. It's metallic looking, and it was estimated to be at least 300 feet in diameter. 1942. So this is not your little ball of light. This is not something, oh, we're tired. Oh, this is something very real that all 8 crew saw, but strangely none of them had a sense of panic. Which is a bit bizarre really when you think that in wartime you have seconds, literally a second or two at most, before you open your machine guns up, friend or foe, shoot or be shot at, aircraft recognition, but all of them said that they didn't have a sense of fear. So in 1942, a crew of 8 see this, never seen anything like it. When they land, they get all debriefed individually, and there are records of this. And they tell exactly the same story from their different aspects of where they were in the plane, corroborating each other. So 8 people corroborating the same incident that's down as a matter of a military record, which we've got in the National Archives. Now why isn't a sighting like this, for the reality of something strange flying in our airspace, on the 6 o'clock news? We can't even build a 300-foot disc now, 74 years later on. Doesn't that tell you that there's something wrong about the way the media reports on this subject? You don't need to be rocket science to work this out. Makes no sense otherwise. Just makes no sense. So here we are in 1942, metallic disc 300 foot across with a row of windows. Let's go through a process of elimination as to what that object was. Was there any other 300 foot disc flying around by the Americans, Japanese? No? No. We can't even do it now. And what they said was after a few minutes it just went silently away, no noise, no air turbulence either as it shot by. Normally if an aircraft is that big and that close to you, it creates an air turbulence. Like a wash, like it on the sea, a wave factor, nothing. So what in conventional terms have we got in 1942? And the answer is sweet naphol. And I always hark back to this case when people go talking about it's stealth. The stealth argument is undoubtedly true for some sightings. We have always had secret aircraft that some people will see, don't know what it is, they'll say it's a UFO. Perfectly fine. But it doesn't explain this. And what does a stealth aircraft do? It has a runway. It takes off on wheels. It goes up in the air, it goes straight. It's their radar invisible, but it's still real. And then it may drop a few bombs, might shoot at something, and then it lands on an airfield. It's still conventional. So while stealth may be exotic to us, stealth does not explain this event. It was before stealth. The real first proper stealthy plane was the U-2 in the 50s. And people can think of the Gary Powers being shot down, the crisis I think in 1960 when he was shot down. Yeah? That's when the existence of the U-2 became aware. So we cannot explain this in any conventional aircraft of the time or since. So it's a good starting point for me as to the reality of what we're dealing with. And the reality is that of 100% of sightings around the world, 95% of them turn out to have a mundane explanation. By that I mean astronomical, pure mistake. Looked odd, people got the wrong end of the stick. After investigation, turns out it's a conventional misidentification. That's fine. But we're left with the residue of 5% of cases. And we're not talking about 5% of 20 cases. Worldwide, we're talking 5% of millions of cases. So if you extrapolate 5% of millions of cases since the 40s onwards, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of really good sightings worldwide. Yeah? So that's a lot. And then what you then have to do is investigate that 5% that's left. And when you investigate that 5%, you can rule out at least another 2%. So after investigation, it turns out it is a normal explanation, just in odd circumstances. But we are left with a hardcore of 3% of cases. Now if you were an investigative journalist and you were tasked with finding about UFOs, where would your start point be as to the reality or not? Would it be at the 100%, or would you start your investigation at the 3% unexplained? Logically, it should start at the 3%, would it not?
Yeah.
But no. The media start every time at 100%. That's a bit bizarre, isn't it? Would I go to court with my weakest evidence, or do you go to court with your best evidence? It's called the best evidence rule. You get your best evidence in court, not your weakest, because the weakest gets thrown out. But not when it comes to journalism. Investigative journalism starts every time at 100%, never at the 3%. And that's because they're working to different agendas, which we can talk about later. Alright? That's the reality. So, that should have been on the 6 o'clock news. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever seen the BBC or ITV, Channel 4, Channel 5 make a documentary that's been aired solely about Foo Fighters during the Second World War?
No.
Has there ever been a broadcast documentary on terrestrial TV in this country about Foo Fighters? When Laurence Olivier was doing his narration, World at War, were Foo Fighters ever mentioned? Do you not find that odd? We talk about how history, not just UFOs, is being manipulated. That the archaeology, some of the best evidence of our origins of man, are not being presented correctly in the media. We'll talk about that later. So, that's the first rung of my evidence that says, explain that in 1942. And you can't. There is no rational explanation, except one, that it didn't come from around here. Now, here's a question. How many people, put your hand up in the air if you've heard of the Roswell crash in America in 1947? Right, put your hands down. In fact, I'm going to do it in reverse now. Who hasn't heard of the Roswell crash in 1947 in the United States? Put your hand up if you haven't. Nothing to be embarrassed about if you're not aware of that. So everybody in this room has heard of the word Roswell. And everybody realises it's not just an American high school TV show, but it related to something allegedly that crashed in 1947, July 1947. Okay. Essentially, from that time, I do believe that something crashed. I do believe it didn't come from around here, and I do believe that we have reversed engineered some of the components. Why? Because it makes sense. If a UFO was to just crash outside the Welcome Inn tonight, what would happen? If we had something crash landing outside, we'd maybe think it was an aircraft crashing. Some of us might stay in, some of us might get too frightened, but some of us would run outside. And some of us would become witnesses to an aircraft crash or whatever. But say if it was a crashed UFO. Wow, nowadays we'd be on our mobile phones taking pictures, video and whatever. So there's a chance that we might be able to get this out to the wider public. But imagine a few years ago, before the invention of the mobile phone and very portable photographic media, high quality media. People didn't have that, so they may be the first witnesses. Think of Kegsburg in '65. Something crashes in the woods. Yeah, we have some people who say, I saw like a chestnut shaped dumbbell type craft on the ground. But we don't have photographs of things like that. But what happens is, somebody straight away onto the 999 blower, something's crashed. Police turn up. What are they going to do? Cordon it off, deal with any people that are injured through shrapnel or whatever. But then what's going to happen? If it was suspected, say it was military, Soviet, Russian, that kind of thing, straight away the military get called in, the cordon would be put further back, whatever was in the ground would be recovered by the military, taken away, never to be seen again, to be worked on in secret. That's exactly what we do now. So it makes sense that if something crashed in 1947, they'd do that. Now here's the thing, people go on about Roswell's in New Mexico. It's a little kind of little place in the middle of nowhere. People go, you know, why do UFOs go to New Mexico? Why Roswell? You get journalists saying, come on, why Roswell? Why anywhere? But what they fail to see is that there was a very good reason why Roswell. Because it was the place of the world's first atomic bomb squadron. So if you think about it, in all the bars in all the world, that UFO crashed in one little tiny place on the world. Oh, what a coincidence. The only place in the world where it's got an atomic bomb squadron. Can you not see correlation there? I can. No coincidence. And no coincidence that UFOs start turning up in numbers, I think, from the Second World War onwards. Why? We detonate an atomic weapon that sends a shock wave, sound wave out into space that announces us as we've developed a certain level of technological capability. And one that says we can actually destroy the very planet that we call Earth. So if you're out there and you came here for your holidays, don't laugh. We laugh, but we shouldn't do. But if you were coming here and you thought the Earth was a beautiful planet, diverse in life, water and fauna, which we are, aren't we? So diverse. It's an incredible planet.